Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Batteryman Yugioh deck profile for April 2022. I've always loved the Batteryman. They're probably one of my favorite Thunder decks in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! We don't really have too many Thunder decks now that I think about it in Yu-Gi-Oh! But Batteryman definitely do stand at the top for just its playstyle being very unique and being able to swarm the field with a bunch of different Batteryman monsters and then utilizing them against your opponent to either destroy all their cards or just set up some pretty good boards using the extra deck. I always have been playing this deck and updating it, and with the latest results, definitely happy with the play style. So if you're looking for a Thunder deck to play in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the Batteryman deck is definitely one to consider. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the monsters, we are running 3 Batteryman Microcell. This is one of your setup cards in the deck. It has a flip effect where when it's flipped face up, you can special summon 1 level 4 lower Batteryman monster from your deck, except for Batteryman Microcell. And after this card has been flipped face up, when it is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you draw 1 card. So even if your opponent attacks into this card, you'll gain your special summon. And then if that attacking monster destroys it by battle, you'll gain the additional draw as well, getting a monster on the field and also allowing you to draw out, thinning out the deck so you don't draw the monster you potentially wanted to summon out, giving you more of that setup for other Batterymen in your graveyard to use for some of the bigger monsters we also run in the deck. One of the better potential cards to search out and special summon with Microcell is Batteryman 9V. When it's summoned, you can add 1 Batteryman monster from your deck to your hand. And if you do, this card's attack and defense become double its original attack and defense. You can only use this effect of 9V once per turn, and during your end phase, destroy this card. So whether you summon out with a normal summon or a special summon, 9V will give you a search for any of the other Batteryman monsters in your deck, making so you can add to your hand just cards that you would either tribute summon out, or at least being able to keep this card until the end phase, which will be your end phase. So if your opponent attacks on their turn and they can't get over the 2000 defense or 2000 point 9V on the field, you can at least save it for a tribute for another Batteryman later on. The other level 4 that I run is Batteryman Solar. When it's normal or special summon, you can send 1 Thunder monster from your deck to the graveyard. If a Thunder monster is normal or special summon while this card's on the field, you can special summon 1 Batteryman token onto the field. It's a level 1, 0 attack and 0 defense. And then you can target 1 Batteryman effect monster you control or in your graveyard, and this card's name becomes that Batteryman. So the second effect for Solar is more of a setup to use with some of the other Batterymen that we aren't running in this deck profile, like double A or triple A, but you also have the setup with Solar to send some of the bigger Batterymen to the graveyard like Fuel Cell to then easily special summon onto the field with cards like Battery Charger. So it's great for that, and the tokens can be used for tributes. There's no restrictions for those tokens once they summon on the field. And for some of the higher level Batteryman monsters, I also run 3 Batteryman Charger. When this card is normal summon, you can special summon 1 Batteryman monster except Charger from your hand or deck, and this card gains 300 attack and defense for each Thunder type monster you control. So additionally, with the different tokens that you can summon out with Batteryman Solar, you can gain attack through that. Then also being able to special summon monsters thanks to Charger means you can summon out cards like 9V if you tribute out other monsters like Solar or Microcell or even another 9V, special summoning onto the field and getting you more and more searches. Charger definitely does help with the playstyle of setting up your field in this deck much more quickly, and other cards like the Monarch Storm 4th can help by taking your opponent's own monsters for the tribute to use for Charger also. And I also run 3 Batteryman Fuel Cell. The max numbers definitely don't hurt this deck at all for all the different Batteryman monsters because they just work very well together, opening up the multiple copies, Fuel Cell included. With this card, if you control 2 or more face-up Batteryman monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. And once per turn, you can tribute 1 Batteryman monster except this card to select another card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. Fuel Cell's effects are not a hard once per turn, so if you have multiple Fuel Cells in your hand, you can special summon them all out onto the field as long as you have the other 2 Batterymen, and then you can use each Fuel Cell respectively. If you have 1 additional monster on the field, you can use the first Fuel Cell to tribute that one to bounce one of your opponent's cards, then use another Fuel Cell to tribute the one that just activated its effect, bouncing another card, and then use the final Fuel Cell if need be to get rid of pesky cards on the field that some of your Batterymen just might not be able to attack over. And then the last of the Batteryman monsters that I run are 2 Batteryman Industrial Strength. You special summon it by banishing 2 Batteryman monsters from your graveyard on the field. It cannot be normal summoned or set. And once per turn, you can banish 1 Batteryman monster from your graveyard to target 1 card, it's a monster, and one card that's a spell or trap on the field and destroy them. So you have to destroy both the spell and trap and the monster, so you can't just choose one or the other. So with it, you can even potentially destroy one of your own monsters if it's just a spell or trap you're trying to get rid of your opponents on the field. But Industrial Strength is definitely your boss monster to go into. That's why I'm running 2, though, because it can be searched out through 9-volt. Opening up multiples of this in your hand and not having the graveyard setup, I would say, is the biggest weakness of this card, but still definitely necessary in the deck for most of your destruction plays against your opponent. And then for the rest of the monsters, I also run 3 Honest. This is just good for setting up power against your opponent. If you wanted to run Ash Blossom or Effect Veiler as an additional hand trap instead of Honest, you can also do that. I just like it in here because there's the potential your opponent will swing into one of your Batteryman. You can just drop the Honest for additional damage and destroying that monster. But once again, this could be a hand trap spot if you wish in the deck. And that is it for the main deck monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. For these spells, I run 3 Battery Charger. You pay 500 life points to special summon 1 monster from your graveyard, and that includes Batteryman in its card name. It's not a once per turn, so if you open up multiple chargers, you have multiple monsters to special summon out. And for just 500 life points, it's an easy use of a basic Monster Reborn in the Batteryman deck. So I would say it's a definite 3-0. For more of the OTK power that this deck can provide as well, I run 3 Short Circuit. I always varied on the numbers I wanted to run in this deck, but I just wanted to see this card more and more often. You activate only if you control 3 or more Batteryman monsters. You destroy all cards your opponent controls. That wipes out their entire field, leaving it so then you can have hopefully at least some of your high power attack Batteryman to swing into your opponent for the potential game. And this card is also not a once per turn. So let's say your opponent floats using some other cards on the field. If you drop the 1 Short Circuit, clear the field, but they still have that 1 pesky monster that brought something else out in the field, you can activate the other Short Circuit and then just wipe out that final card they may have brought out. This definitely does come in handy when I'm facing some specific extra deck monster cards or monsters, like I said, that'll just summon out something else onto the field that could be pesky to get around. And for the other spells, I also run 2 Monarch's Stormforth. I thought of running 3 of this card in the deck. If I were to bump it up to 3, the only reason I really like it is for the additional speed of being able to summon out Batteryman Charger to the field. Once during this turn, if you attribute a monster you control for a tribute summon, you contribute 1 monster your opponent controls as you controlled it. You go and activate 1 Stormforth per turn, and during the turn you activate this, you cannot special summon monsters from your extra deck. You do have an extra deck in this deck, but it's not as needed for some of the plays. You still have resources to use and go into if you decide not to use your extra deck in the Batteryman deck. But like I said, you can go into other cards like Fuel Cell for the tribute using your opponent's cards, but I would say Charger is the best one because then after Charger is summoned out with the normal summon, you gain the special summon of one or the other Batteryman monsters you may need on the field for additional setup. And for getting resources back to your hand, I also run 2 Recycling Batteries. Now, with this, you add 2 Thunder-type monsters with 1500 or less attack from your graveyard to your hand. So the 1500 or less attack applies to the Batteryman Solar, 9-volt, and Microcell. So adding cards back just for recycling, either setting up a card on the field or even going for an additional normal summon, will definitely help with all of these cards. I only like to run the 2, though. If you wanted to run a 3rd Stormforth, you could potentially take out one of these and just make it a 1-up for late game recycling and put in a 3rd copy of Monarch Stormforth. And for some of the other 1-ups for the spells, I run 1 Foolish Burial, 1 Monster Reborn, the 1 Pot of Avarice. This is more also for the recycling, again, with the play setup, but it could potentially be the other spot if you want to keep the 2 recycling batteries in for a 3rd Monarch Stormforth, and the 1 Pot of Desires, along with running the majority of play sets for a good number of the Batteryman cards. This is in here just so I have draw consistency. The biggest hit to this deck would be if your opponent interrupted your field on the swarm of all your monsters. So being able to at least draw into some more additional cards could definitely save you, especially if some of those draws are fuel cells, just to get more monsters out onto the field. And that is it for the spells. We'll now move on to the traps. For the traps, I run 3 Rivalry of Warlords. Each player can only control 1 type of monster. Send all their face-up monsters they control to the graveyard. This goes back to how you don't have to focus entirely on the use of extra deck monsters in this deck. I do run a couple Thunder monsters in the extra deck, but Rivalry just makes it so you can have full control of the field with just your Thunder-type Batteryman monsters and not have any worry of your opponent having different types as well. You can always side these out for additional cards if your opponent is playing a deck that only solely focuses on 1 type of monster, but it can shut them down from any other extra deck type of plays that they might have tried to go into. It's like I said, if you can't access your extra deck, you still have cards in the deck that can either destroy cards your opponent controls or bounce them back to their hand, or at least give you field presence also. And then for the last of the traps, I run 3 Call the Haunted. This is just to help with the assistance of cards like 9-Volt, and also for the fact that Fuel Cell will tribute monsters, leaving you kind of emptyless against your opponent for the attack. So at least if you bounce cards back and then activate Call of the Haunted, you can summon out another Batteryman to the field and swing for additional power against your opponent, or potentially summon out a Batteryman that will either set up the graveyard for more additional monsters to use for cards like Industrial Strength, or search them out to your hand using 9-Volt. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. For the Link monsters, I run 1 Summer Summoner. You need 2 Thunder monsters to make this card. Once per turn, during the opponent's turn, quick effect, you can discard 1 card, then target 1 Thunder monster in your graveyard, except a Link monster, and special summon it to a zone this card points to. This can just set up more and more plays from your hand. If you use cards like Recycling Batteries to add back some of the lower attack point monsters for your Batteryman, that can at least even give you discard cost for cards like some Summer Summoner. If you did use them for the Link play, let's say you have them in your hand and you go for the Link play, you can then at least have one of the higher level monsters that one of them may have even set up on the field to special summon out during your opponent's turn by using those cards for the discard. For the other Link monsters, I also run 2 Hip Potion Engen. Hiring up the attack of the light attribute monsters on the field definitely will come in handy with this card as well, boosting up by 500 attack and defense, and being able to recycle other cards back to your hand from your graveyard. One of my favorites being Fuel Cell, just to easily special summon it out as long as I have the other Batteryman. And I also run 1 Lina the Light Charmer, more light attribute plays with this one. 1 Underclock Taker for just some of those pesky attack point monsters that my opponent may have that I have to get over by lowering its attack compared to the Batteryman that this card will point to. 1 Nightmare Phoenix, along with 1 Nightmare Unicorn, and 1 Link Karibo. Once again, set up in the graveyard for cards like Microcell using Link Karibo, and then being able to banish it for cards like my Industrial Strength. And also I run the 1 Borolo Dragon. This could also be Borosword. You make enough monster presence on the field to easily go into Borosword and still have additional monsters on the field to use, in the same premise with Boroload. And for the Xyz monsters, 1 Fujinte Tsukuyomi for the light discard draw for some more consistency. 1 Tornado Dragon, the 1 Baguska, along with 1 Exciton Knight, 1 Abyss Dweller, and one of my favorites is the Constellar Ptolemy M7. Once again, recycle plays, and if you don't have the bounce power to use against your opponent, sometimes I just like overlaying the 2 Fuel Cells together into this card to get me back either monsters to my hand or an additional way to return monsters from my opponent to their hand as a way to detach one of the Fuel Cells also. And then as for some of the other go-to plays in the deck, setup with the Microcell is very, very vital for a lot of the first turn setup, but also you can rely on cards like your Batteryman Solar along with your Battery Charger for more special summon presence on the field. So if you summon out your Batteryman Solar on the field, you can then activate its card effect to send a Batteryman to the graveyard. Now what you can send if you have the Battery Charger in your hand is entirely up to you, but most of the time I do like to send the 9-Volt, because then after you send 9-Volt, you can activate Battery Charger to special summon the 9-Volt onto the field. The 9-Volt will activate, allowing you to then search for a Batteryman from your deck to your hand. The one you can search out then is your Batteryman Fuel Cell. And once again, if you have additional Fuel Cells in your hand, all the better, because once you add that 1 Fuel Cell to your hand, you have the requirements on the field for special summoning out, which is 2 Batteryman monsters. Summoning out that Batteryman as well will then give you the 3 monster field presence. You can overlay the Solar and the 9-Volt, because unless you tribute the 9-Volt for the Fuel Cell, it'll be destroyed at the end of the turn. So I always like to use it at least for an extra deck play. I can either go for the Link 2 into some Summer Summoner, or even go for the option of powering up the Fuel Cell that is already on the field as well with that play. And with it, I also have the option, if you had the 3 Batteryman on the field, your opponent went first and set up a board presence. If you have cards like Short Circuit in your hand, you can destroy all cards they control right then and there using this card. But once again, going more on the defensive play style, if you overlay the 2 together, you can even just go for a Graveyard Shutdown kind of play with Abyss Dweller, or even the defensive play of Baguska, or more back row popping with cards like Tornado Dragon, depending on what you want for that preference. But the field presence will also be taken into account if you have the 2 fuel cell, because then you can also use both of the fuel cells to tribute these 2 battery men to bounce 2 cards your opponent may have had on the field, and then use the 2 to overlay into your Constellar Ptolemy M7. And with that, you already bounce back their monsters, so you can use the detach for the Ptolemy M7 to then add back an additional battery man that was already in your graveyard to normal summon back next turn. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Like I said, I've always loved the Batteryman, so I'm always glad when I can update the deck. And maybe we'll get some new support down the road. Who knows? Some different types of batteries are definitely out there that they can turn into cards, so we just have to wait and see them. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And Kira Twig out.